Call to order a meeting for the normal local liquor commission. Please call the roll.
Mayor Kus?
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Here.
Ms. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Byers?
Here.
Ms. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Preston?
Here.
Mr. McCarthy?
Here.
First item of business is approval of the minutes of the special meeting of September 16th, 2024.
Move approval.
Second.
Changes or corrections? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Ms. Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. That item is approved. Let me get organized here. We have a number of liquor violations. I'll go over those and point out what they are. Those are basically situations where individuals underage tried to buy alcohol and were caught doing that. The first one is Casey's Retail, doing business as Casey's at 1930 North Linden Street. This is the second violation in 2 years, and they have settled with a fine of $500. The balance of these are all first violations, and all have been settled with $250 fines. That is Los Potrillos Real Mexican Cuisine at 201 Landmark Drive. Heaters Hot Chicken at 100 South Fell. The Bloomington Normal Marriott at 201 Broadway. Buffalo Wild Wings at 603 South Main Street. Maggie Miley's at 126 Buford Street. And these are all first-time violations. Fines were levied at $250 and have all been paid. We have a second installment of license payments from American Drug Stores LLC, doing business as Osco Drugs at 901 South Cottage Avenue. They've opted to pay in 2 installments, and that payment has been made. We have a video gaming application for the Normal Firehouse Pizza and Pub at 129 East Buford Street. And requesting a video gaming license for machines at 129 East Buford. Motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion on that? Please call the roll.
Ms. Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. That license is approved. That concludes our business at liquor. Motion for adjournment, please.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Ms. Harris?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. That meeting is adjourned, and we'll re-adjourn for a council meeting in 30 seconds. I don't want to jump right in. Call to order a meeting for the Normal Town Council for November 4th, 2024. Please call the roll.
Mayor Kus?
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Here.
Ms. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Byers?
Here.
Ms. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Preston?
Here.
Mr. McCarthy?
Here.
We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, indivisible, with liberty and justice. We have One public comment, actually two public commenters appearing as one. Tammy Hansen and Garth Piercy. If you just come up and help yourself to a chair here, all those microphones are alive. Basic rules for public comment are please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, council members. My name is Tammy Hansen, and this is Garth Piercy, my husband. We live at 107 Sandra Court in Normal. We've been hosting guests through Airbnb for 6 years now, and we're proud to be among the 21 in the city who are licensed and who pay our taxes monthly. And uniquely, we live on our property that we rent out. Now, over the years, we've welcomed guests from across the globe and across the country. We have people from France, China, Lebanon we've hosted from all over the place. And along with their kind words about our very friendly cats, we often hear, "Thank you for providing a clean, affordable place to stay." And one of our guests stood out to me. She came to reunite with her father after 12 years. She hadn't seen the man in 12 years. And she came and said, "If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have been able to stay as long as I had." She couldn't afford it. She was on a fixed income and couldn't afford it. I look at what we do as a service more than a business. We also had a woman come, she flew into Chicago, took the train down to see or experience the Cicada-geddon, and was disappointed because Normal didn't have one. So we drove her out to Clinton Lake so she could hear the cicadas during Cicada-geddon. And she was just so thrilled. And it's part of what we do, is try to not just provide a place for them to stay, but provide an experience and a welcoming atmosphere. And each of those visitors come and they spend money here in this town. They go to restaurants, they go shopping. And so not only does the Airbnb enrich our lives with the people that we meet, but it also enriches the town and it supports our community. Now, we understand that there are bad apples that can spoil the things for everybody. And, at the last council meeting, we were here for the working committee, and various ideas were passed around. We could ban them completely, do a moratorium, require live-ins. But the big issue was, how do we enforce that? And it's understandable, how do you enforce that? So it got me to think, and I was like, I really want to keep doing in my business. I love the people we meet, and I think really the best bet for us would be to require owner occupancy. Los Angeles does it. New York City does it. There are a number of cities who have passed ordinances. How do you enforce it? You make them submit a government-issued ID showing their residence is the place of the business. This way, I think it would be an effective way to ensure accountability while allowing responsible hosts like us to continue contributing positively to our community. Thank you.
We move to the omnibus agenda items considered routine and would be taken by a single vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. Motion for approval, please.
So moved.
Second.
Items on the omnibus agenda tonight are approval of the minutes of the council work session of October 21st, 2024, approval of the minutes of the public hearing of October 21st, 2024, and approval of the minutes of the regular council meeting of October 21st, 2024. A report to receive and file Town of Normal expenditures for payment as of October 30th, 2024, and a resolution accepting a quote authorizing the purchase of a 2024 Ford Bronco Sport from Star Ford in the amount of $30,575.21. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Aye.
Ms. Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Byers. Ms. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Preston.
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. Those items are approved. We have a number of items on general orders. The first is an ordinance of reapproving an amended annexation agreement for the Trails of Sunset Lake.
Move approval.
Second.
To do a little housekeeping, this item was voted on our last meeting, but we did not have a supermajority vote, which is required for an annexation. We had one council member absent, so we did not have the supermajority, so we're bringing that back for house cleaning and crossing our eyes and dotting our T's. No, that's what we did last week, last meeting. Discussion on this item. Please call the roll.
Ms. Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz? Mayor Kus?
Aye, that item is approved. Item 8 is an ordinance rezoning the property on Trails of Sunset Lake subdivision and reapproving an amended preliminary subdivision plans for portions of that subdivision.
Move approval.
Second.
And again, this is a follow-up on the previous item. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
No.
Ms. Harris?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye, that item is approved. Item 9 is an ordinance amending Chapter 22 of the Town Code having to do with short-term rental licensing and a moratorium therein.
Move approval.
Second.
Second, is there discussion on this item? Ms. Reese, do you have some comments?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to introduce this as a follow-up to our conversation from our last meeting where we had the work session. Prior to your meeting, we talked about short-term rentals, some challenges that we've faced, also in response to some public commenters that have been before you in recent months. So what this does is we're proposing a 6-month moratorium on new licenses. So what we were saying, this would be effective December 1, so all existing short-term rentals would have an opportunity to continue to operate. Those that are operating and have not filed the business license as required would be given until the end of November to get licensed. And then from December 1st of this year through until June 1st of 2025, we'd have a moratorium on new licenses. That would give us time to come to council with a solution, either a modified short-term rental program or something that we believe can address the concerns that we've heard. So this is for the 6-month proposed moratorium is an opportunity for us to vet some solutions and then come back to council for a decision.
Okay. I'll start with a question. How are we monitoring new licenses and compliances? How will we be doing that during that moratorium period?
During that 6-month period, I think we're going to be asking the planning staff to keep looking and checking the what do we call them? The online portals for short-term rentals and just track to see if there are any new properties that come online. That's how we discovered the current 63.
Thank you. Mr. Byers, I think you had your hand raised up.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I missed the last meeting, but I did get the chance to watch most of the meeting and appreciate the diligent conversation my colleagues had along with members of the community. So I kind of see two logical sides to this issue, and I kind of want to just highlight my thoughts, kind of going both directions. So I use Airbnb a lot, right? Both for personal and professional reasons. I love to travel. I travel a lot for work, and so I use Airbnb fairly frequently, and especially when traveling with friends or with family. I think it's a really great way to have a nice trip and to really explore a community and be a good neighbor while doing so. And so I really appreciate the positive of it and appreciate the comments we heard from tonight and agree a lot with that. At its origin, I know this was discussed at the work session. Airbnb was an opportunity for folks to welcome folks into their home and offer them a unique accommodation, which certainly exchanging commerce along the way, but also culture and friendship as well. So I see a lot of positive in Airbnb in general, but at the same time, there are also some concerns that I do think we need to look at, and I do think that we need to try to address. Because this isn't just an issue that we're talking about here in the town of Normal. The Airbnb question it's a national issue, it's an international issue. If you Google or I've been really into the Chat GPT lately, and I asked it to give me a bunch of examples of different cities across the world and across the country and what they're doing on this issue. There's a wide variety, and particularly in cities that have a lot of tourism. There are cities where their entire central like areas of their city are basically being taken over, and the local residents don't have housing options. And so it's a real issue. I don't think that our community is quite into that that model. But I think that something that is worth considering is that when folks are traveling to our community, there's different options as to where they could stay. I mean, right now the Airbnb is an option, but there's also hotels. But the folks that live in our community, they don't really have an alternative. They need somewhere that they have to either buy or to rent. So I want to make sure that we're balanced. I agree. It was ironic that what the public commenters mentioned was also my thought. I really think that the owner-occupied aspect of this, I know that we need to talk about enforcement, and let's have a conversation about it, but I think that could be a possible solution, because that gets this back to the origin of the issue, which was allowing people to earn a little bit of money by welcoming guests into their home and allowing that exchange, while also ensuring that we don't have entire streets and neighborhoods getting gobbled up by essentially tourists and visitors, and kind of changing the makeup of our community. So I really see kind of both sides of this, and that's why I will support the moratorium that's on the table, because I think that there is value in making sure we get this right. Because personally, I don't want to stop folks like we have in the crowd from being able to host folks from around the country, around the world, to engage in an exchange of commerce and culture. I don't want to stop that. But at the same time, I also want to listen to the folks that say, hey, my street's got, an Airbnb or 2 Airbnbs on it, and it's a nuisance, and it's really bothers me. So I want to find a way to balance those two things, and I think we can do that. So just making my opinion known, but I will vote yes for the moratorium to allow us time to review. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Smith?
Mr. Byers stole a lot of my thunder by referencing the origin of the concept of the Airbnb being some homeowners in San Francisco trying to get assistance with their mortgage. And I think owner-occupied is a worthwhile consideration for this model, because I strongly feel that someone who is inviting guests and they're still on the property to witness that guest behavior is less likely to be a nuisance to the neighborhood that an empty property would, and the tenants come and go from it. And I personally know of a professor at ISU who would use a room in somebody else's house to teach during the day and sleep the night because his classes were late. So it worked out perfectly in those instances. So I too would support owner-occupied as one model, but all in all, I am in favor of the moratorium, so we can really study this in depth before we come up with anything that will be disruptive. And one other thing, as we're studying the moratorium, there was discussion about a 5-year time frame for the owners to phase out. And I just want to point out, from an accounting standpoint, that 5-year time frame to decide to handle disposal of that property or converting it to some other use is important from a tax standpoint, because in tax code as it is currently written, you can have a residence, if you've lived there 2 out of the last 5 years, you can not avoid paying capital gains tax on the sale of that property. So I do want to speak in favor of that 5-year window for if we decide not to allow B&Bs of certain types before the owners would have to convert the property or dispose of it.
I'm going to ask that we not get into the issues here. We're talking about a moratorium here tonight, so the staff can gather this data and go through it. So let's not try to craft that ordinance at the table here tonight. Mr. Preston?
Thanks. In light of that, Mayor, I will just shorten my comments and start by thanking the public commenters tonight. I think that discussion at our work session revolved around Airbnbs that are not like the situation that you guys provide. I love that you view it more as a service than a business. And I think you made some really good points here tonight. I know that staff will look at that, our comments up here, and everything else as we look at the best long-term solution for how this should be addressed after this 6-month moratorium is done. But in an environment where we currently only have about 1/3 of the operating Airbnbs in Normal who are actually licensed and following the rules we currently have in place, thanks for being one of them and for how you guys are doing it. And I support the moratorium for us to more comprehensively look at this situation overall. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Lorenz?
Thank you. The ChatGPT is quite knowledgeable on Airbnbs. So, but I have a question and then maybe a comment or two. Why are we enacting this as of December 1? And I know that's not that far off, but why not more immediate?
Good question. Mr. Corsagrosa?
Sure. So since this is an ordinance, it wouldn't go into effect for another 10 days after tonight's passage, if it passes. So that would bump us up to November 14th, and it felt like 2 weeks from that point was a reasonable time to let the operating STRs come in and get their licenses.
Okay, so that maybe brings me to my next one. So the 40-some that we think do not have licenses right now, they have between now and December to do so?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and if they don't?
And if they don't, then as of December 1st, we would not accept new business license applications for short-term rentals, and they would be out of compliance.
Okay. And my next question or comment is, from this process, will we better be able to diagnose the problem? Because of the 60-some, there may be just a few bad apples, in which case that may help us to craft a more targeted solution as opposed to, you know, a broad brush solution. So will that be taken into consideration in the crafting of the ordinance in 6 months?
Well, I probably the best can describe it as staff will be taking in consideration the problems that we know of and the challenges that we are aware of through our other municipality connections, and find out what's happening in other cities. You know, to define where the problems are is issue specific. There might be a particular property that has occasional loud parties, but that doesn't mean that's always the case at that particular property. So we wouldn't know where a renter problem might happen next weekend. You know, so I can simply just say that we'll take under advisement the ones that we know that we've heard about from neighbors through these public comment periods and through problems that have arisen more frequently this fall. But I can't say that means we can identify where other problems may or may not happen, if that makes sense. So if the problems we've heard about have been parking issues, noise, music, and that could happen at any of these properties at any time. So we'll certainly try to be mindful of the challenges the neighboring parcels and property owners have experienced, while keeping in mind some of the responsive of property owners we've heard from. But again, properties can change ownership. We don't know whose properties are going to be problems in the future, but we'll be issue specific as much as possible, I guess.
Okay. And one last question, what will be done to reach out to the 40-some, or if anything?
The currently unlicensed ones,
Unlicensed, yeah.
the ownership that seems to be on the township records, we'll send them a letter
Okay, so you will be contacting them by mail?
by mail. Yeah.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Ms. Harris?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to apologize that I didn't have this thought ahead of time to ask the question, because I try to get my questions in early. But for ones that are out of compliance, if I remember correctly, we currently don't have any. Oh gosh, why am I having a whole brain blank this moment? But there's no recourse, I should say, or anything that happens to them by not being in compliance what I did not see is if they operate out of compliance post the December 1st, what is the actual penalty, if any, and then will they be allowed to do the update in January, renewal in January 10th? Could we then can we then say they are not eligible?
Yes,
Or-
that's what
okay.
we would say, because they missed their window to become licensed.
Okay.
And then for an unlicensed property that continues to function as a short-term rental after December 1st, it would go through the legal process in terms of a code violation. You know, trying to prove more than two unrelated in the usual code compliance process. Mr. Crisagrosa?
Yes, our ordinance has fines for failure to obtain a business license and operating without one. So that would be the approach.
So that would be that it would be just the code, that particular code violation. There would be nothing else attached, just the non-operating without a business license.
I'm assuming there's no other violations. If they are, operating as a short-term rental and there are, nuisance type violations, so we could go after those as well. But just from the perspective of are you licensed or not, it would be that ordinance violation fine for no business license.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had.
Mr. McCarthy?
Thanks, Mayor. I appreciate the conversation and questions and comments by my colleagues. Most have been addressed. I appreciate the commenter trying to be creative in a way for us to hash out. So from the why December 1st, what happens after December 1st, who is and who isn't, we've addressed all those. The last remaining is the toughest and that we have in front of us, and I made a comment to this effect, is that it took a intern a bunch of time and staff a bunch of time just to figure out that there's 40 some that are renting in our community that we didn't know about and aren't registered. How do we actually do that? So I made the comment, I know Airbnb has tools for municipalities to do it, but doesn't readily hand those out for us to be able to track those. So even in the moratorium period, are we gonna have to commit a bunch of staff time just to figure out who's not complying? And isn't that at the core of this whole issue, is that why are the municipality taking on a bunch of staff time to try to figure out who's compliant and who's not? So I'm putting that out there. I know it's kind of a hard line, but how do we know without a bunch of staff time?
Well, there will be staff time. The good news is we at least now know where the 63 are, so we can
Good point.
see what other ones are identified beyond those 63
Fair point.
and start there, and hopefully that reduces some of our staff time for tracking. But we'll have to check regularly. And as Ms. Davison pointed out during the work session, there are quite a few websites or apps that manage these. So
Right.
it's a series of checking all the various websites and apps to see what might be new that pops up. So it will be time intensive, but not hopefully as much as what the intern put in this summer.
So I guess, and I don't want to marry your fair point about not talking about the ordinance that's coming, so I'll calm that down to just the moratorium timeframe. But it seems like, certainly owner occupied provides a potential minimizing of that, but without tools that are easy for the town to track, it sounds like this is becoming an increasing burden on the community, or on the town and at the taxpayer's expense. And I'm wondering, the cost benefit of that at some point.
And I appreciate that concern, Mr. McCarthy. I will say the moratorium gives us 6 months that we'll know. We'll be coming back to you within 6 months for a solution, because at the end of 6 months, we'll have to know what the rules are. But that doesn't mean we couldn't come back sooner.
Further comments or questions? Please call the roll.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Ms. Harris,
Aye.
Mr. Byers,
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye, that item is approved. We have one item of new business, a motion to approve an appointment to the Connect Transit Board and a reappointment to McLean County Regional Planning Commission.
Move approval.
Second.
Mr. McCarthy, would you go over those?
I'd be happy to. For the Connect Transit Board, we have Miss Gina Bianchi. She's been a Normal resident since 2009 and McLean County resident since 1993. She just retired from Millikan University as Vice President of Alumni and Development. And she spent 25 years working in higher ed, a bunch of time at Illinois State University as well. She believes the community has a lot to offer, and she looks forward to being able to be an advocate and offering her services and insight to the Connect Transit Board. She holds a certified fundraising executives designation as a member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. She's received her master's degree in athletic administration from Illinois State University and will fill the vacancy created by Tim McHugh's resignation. Her term will expire in June 30th of 2027. For the McLean County Regional Planning Commission, we have Mr. Carl Teichman as a reappointment to the McLean County Regional Planning Commission to a new term expiring on December 31st, 2027.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Ms. Harris,
Aye.
Mr. Byers,
Aye.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye, those appointments are approved. We have one person wishing to speak at public comment. Linda Humphrey, if you come forward and take a chair. Again, to remind you, just please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
I'm Linda Humphrey. I live in Normal, Illinois, and 414 Orlando Avenue. I received a letter from the town of Normal inviting us to a neighborhood meeting on November 14th. It was sent out October 28th. I've spoken to some neighbors, and we would like, at that meeting, the opportunity to have more adults attend the meeting, and maybe the school or the PTO or some organization could have the classrooms open for the children of elementary age to go to and have an activity while the adults and the parents in the neighborhood attend the meeting. Another suggestion is we do not all have computers and internet and printers to obtain the crime rate of section or Area 11. Area 11 is from, we'll take an example of Orlando Street. All the way from Constitution Trail, all the way across Main Street to ISU land is that from east to west. North to south is Rab Road down to Summit. I went to the police department today, and I met with a gentleman, Officer Park, and I was on the computer with him. I wanted a printout of sex offenders. I found out we have 2 in that area out of 36. I also wanted a map printed out of Area 11. So at the meeting, somehow somebody can have that up on the screen so people are aware what we're talking about for the neighborhood. I also want the crime rate of 7 days and 30 days. It's very interesting. When I get in my car at night to go to some organization or something, and I hear on the radio I should stay in my house because Orlando, and on the west side of Orlando, there is, the situation. We want to also know about Section 8. How many people are in Section 8 in that neighborhood? Because at the school, it increases the ability of the students to live in a real world. In Denver, Colorado, what they did to help out, they would only allow 20% out of apartments of 100, 20 apartments to be Section 8. Therefore, the community was a real world. It wasn't just all low income. I'm a single parent, and so I've had situations like when I went to Lancaster when I moved to town in 1978 to live there. I went there to pay the money of the deposit. I took my son, Chris. Well, all of a sudden, she pulled the papers away from me and she said, "This is Chris?" And I said, "Yes." "Well, I thought he was a girl." I said, "No." "Well, we can't allow you to be here." The reason was he was a boy. He was only 2 years old, but all they had available was a one-bedroom. So even in '78, we had a housing department conflict. I want to compliment Greg Trouble.
Ms. Humphrey, your time is
I'm
up.
done? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Before taking a motion for adjournment, are there council comments or concerns? Ms. Smith?
Just two items of interest to our veterans. First of all, the Veterans Fair Day, again, is scheduled for this Friday, the 8th, from 2 to 5, and Saturday, the 9th, from 9 to noon at the Interstate Center, and where veterans will have an opportunity to interface with a variety of resources for their concerns. But separately, on November 11th, the Veterans Day ceremony this year will not be at the McLean County History Museum. Instead, it's going to be at the VFW Post 454 at 1006 East Lincoln Street in Bloomington, and attendees are advised to park no later than 10:30 a.m. as the ceremony, some of it will be held outdoors, and they don't want late arrivals to be interfering with some of the ceremonies that are planned. So, thank you.
Mr. Byers?
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to take a minute to talk about an issue that's important to me and important to a lot of folks in our community. I wanted to express my gratitude for our first responders, the Normal Police Department and Normal Fire Department. Every single day, these men and women wake up prepared to risk injury or death to keep our community safe. When we run from danger, they run towards it. Being a police officer or a firefighter isn't an easy job. It's a job that can only be done by men and women that are brave and who have a heart of service for their communities. I greatly appreciate all the feedback we've gotten regarding public safety issues. I understand we have several community organizations and individuals that have gotten involved in providing feedback to a potential nuisance ordinance that is aimed at addressing major public safety incidents in our community. I welcome those organizations' feedback and involvement in the process. In my absence at last council meeting, I appreciate my colleagues' decision to table this issue to ensure we have some time to make sure we get this right. But the reason we brought this issue up is that we had a lot of residents that reached out to us concerned about public safety. These residents don't have an organization to advocate for them. We're their advocate. I appreciate staff sharpening the pencil on this ordinance to try to create clarity and address concerns that have been raised. But I want to be abundantly clear. I trust the men and women of the Normal Police Department. I trust Chief Petrilli's leadership. We have serious safety issues that need to be addressed, and I trust in our police officers to help us to address them. We can't address these issues without them. Whatever ordinance we ultimately pass, we aren't going to make everybody happy. If our goal on this issue is to make everybody happy, we have zero chance of succeeding. So I'm all for additional review and pencil sharpening to provide clarity about what we are and are not looking to regulate and address, but I will not support an ordinance that is heavily watered down that we approve just to pat ourselves in the back and say we did something. The safety of our community matters, and I trust the men and women of the Normal Police Department to be diligent public safety officers on this and any other issue. Thanks.
Ms. Lorenz?
Thank you. I want to raise up a concern over on the west portion of our community about in the Oakdale school area. Oakdale and Ruston had a bridge removed recently that was deteriorating in its lifespan. Been there for over 50 years. The bridge was taken down recently. One neighbor reached out to me, unclear as to what happened. Upon further investigation, I was able to get an answer from our city manager for this particular neighbor, but he did follow up with me and say that perhaps the rest of the neighbors are not aware of what's going on. So I would just ask for perhaps some communication to that portion of our community. Thank you.
Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Ms. Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Byers?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. We are adjourned.